Noah Basketball is our new presenting sponsor of our Coaching You podcast. Noah Basketball is a shot tracking and data company that has helped change how coaches and players perfect the game's most important skill, shooting. Noah is a data service provider that uses machine learning and the latest computer vision technology to provide real-time data and feedback to improve shooting accuracy and consistency for professional and amateur basketball players. Noah has now analyzed over 570 million shots from countless high school, hundreds of college teams, and 28 NBA franchises. The technology is simply amazing. Once the system has been installed, players will be able to get immediate feedback on their shooting arc, left and right positioning, depth, makes or misses, and makes the data available to players and coaches on your mobile device. For more information about how Noah can help your team, visit noahbasketball.com.
It came down to how well can you get a group of people to work together, and the relationships of going through the ups and the downs and the struggles and the difficulties and the challenges. And that's really, probably at a younger age, I didn't realize it, Coach, because when I was playing for Coach Pitino at Providence, there was no 20-hour rule. But what happened was we were practicing all the time.
Right.
All the time. I mean, we met 3 times a day. We had individual instruction in the early afternoon. We had practice, after classes at 3:00. And then after study hall, we came back and shot free throws or dummied offense or went through scatter reports. And, people said, but we were with each other so much, the relationships that got established during that time for 2 years. I'm still friendly with these guys 40 years later.
Think about that.
You know what I mean? It's the relationship part of it. And that's what I think probably didn't really quite understand early on, because you're thinking about, we got to win. We got to win. You want to prove yourself. And certainly you want to prove yourself all the time. I don't mean you just don't feel like you want to prove yourself, but you realize it's less about proving yourself and more about the relationships and the collective.
Hey, welcome to another Coaching You podcast with the Coach Brendan Suhr, presented by Noah Basketball. Today, newly inducted Hall of Famer Billy Donovan, dear friend for 25 years. Coach, so great to have you on before the season.
Well, good to see you, Coach, always. So thank you.
We were talking before we got started. The Hall of Fame enshrinement, they're always so special. And what a class you went in on. But I thought Friday night when Rick was presenting you at the Mohegan Sun, and then his presentation about you was as good as I've ever heard. And then, of course, your compliments back to him on Saturday were spectacular. I remember when I can't even remember when you were at the University of Florida and you and I did a podcast, one of the first ones I've ever done. And I asked you some questions, totally, we just pulled them out. There were things that interest me. And I still have those 5 answers that you gave to the questions. And I think this will set the tone, I think, for all the coaches that we have around the world that listen to this. But I asked you then, what is coaching to you?
Yeah, I think it is for me is even when I was playing, as you're going through getting ready for practices, games, whatever it is, you don't realize, I think, the impact that coaches have on you until maybe after you leave, and I think that could be the case when I left my high school coach, Frank Morris, and went to college. When I left college from Coach Pitino and was trying to play in the NBA, playing for Flip Saunders in the CBA, you start to think about some of these people that are in your life and how they influenced you and impacted you. So I always felt like the responsibility, once I finished playing, was can I take what I've learned from the game, from my experiences, and apply them back to help players and to help people, not only in the game of basketball, but just next steps in life and those kind of things. So, I always think the coaching piece of it is how do you take somebody that is where they are today and help them get to, where they want to get to. And a lot of times when you're younger, and I could say this for myself, you have this drive or this desire to be good, but maybe you don't know the way to go about it or how to go about it. And it takes people like coaches to explain to you the things that go into winning, what it takes to win, how to impact winning, how to impact others. And then the coaching part of it to me is, how do you actually impact others and help others and invest in others that when they go on, they can do the same for other people.
So Chuck Daly, when we used to travel, the neat thing about being in the NBA and you're taking your charters after games and stuff, once you've been doing it for a while, many nights you don't really want to talk about the game, because you're on to the next game already. You process that maybe later. But I remember I used to, because I knew I was with him his last 12 years of coaching in the NBA and through the Dream Team and all that. And I asked him a lot of questions. And I asked him once, why are you coaching? And he said, let me tell you, every year I ask myself, why am I coaching? And now, as a Grizzly veteran that you are of, 20 plus years in college and now starting at your 11th year in the NBA, right? Why are you coaching at this level now?
Coach, I think that's a great question. I think and I'm sure we'll get into some of this, but when I got hired to be a head coach first at 28 years old, you have basically no head coaching resume, no head coaching experience, nothing. And you're starting out, you've got a young family, you're married. I got, I'm not even married for really 5 or 6 years, and I'm a head coach, and you realize you have a family to provide for, and you start to think about your own success. You start to think about, how do I provide for my family? You start to think about winning. And it really gets almost self-consuming because you want to be successful. You want to do a good job. You have
Sure.
people like athletic directors and presidents that hire you. You hire assistant coaches. You've got players there. Families are impacted. So you want to do well and you want to prove yourself. And I think in society, when you're trying to climb that tree of success, when you're fortunate enough to get it, and I feel fortunate that I was able to do it, when I say do it, win a championship in my early 40s, it really hit me and it brought me back to, I think it was Tom Brady was on 60 Minutes and they had won like 3 of the last 5 Super Bowls. And he said something along the lines, is this all there is? Is this all that it's about? And I think after winning it, to be quite honest, I was not in a great place after we won. And it was an incredible experience, but that came up, that exact, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And the one thing I feel like I was fortunate that happened to me was it made me really think about that question. And the thing that I realized is that rings and trophies are just a symbol of the sacrifice, the connection, the relationships that went on during that time. And I've realized that the most important thing, is the relationships in terms of getting a group of people to come together to try to accomplish something they couldn't accomplish on their own. And we all need each other. Coaches need the players need the coaches, system, right. Everybody needs each other. And then I got to a place where it just was like, okay, this is what I really enjoy doing. This is what I like doing. And clearly the competitiveness didn't change and chasing winning didn't change. But you and I both know Jim Lair, who's a great sports psychologist. And he was in Orlando when I was in Florida, and we used to spend a lot of time together. And he said to me, Billy, everybody's always chasing something. And there's nothing wrong with the chase. The chase is great. But what you have to pay attention to is, what is the chase turning you into? Ooh. Are you proud and happy of what the chase is turning you into? Or are you disappointed in what the chase is turning into you? And he had talked about competition and chasing things as actually opportunities to build character, to build resiliency and toughness and all those kind of things. So to me, I felt like it was really, it came down to how well can you get a group of people to work together, and the relationships of going through the ups and the downs and the struggles and the difficulties and the challenges. And that's really probably at a younger age, I didn't realize it, Coach, because when I was playing for Coach Pitino at Providence, there was no 20-hour rule. But what happened was we were practicing all the time.
Right.
All the time. I mean, we met 3 times a day. We had individual instruction in the early afternoon. We had practice, after classes at 3:00. And then after study hall, we came back and shot free throws or dummied offense or went through scatter reports. And, people said, but we were with each other so much, the relationships that got established during that time for 2 years, I'm still friendly with these guys 40 years later.
Think about that.
You know what I mean? It's the relationship part of it. And that's what I think probably didn't really quite understand early on, because you're thinking about, we got to win. We got to win. You want to prove yourself. And certainly you want to prove yourself all the time. I don't mean you just don't feel like you want to prove yourself, but you realize it's less about proving yourself and more about the relationships and the collective.
That is so good. More in the beginning, it's about me, and then it turns into we later on. Yeah, that's so powerful. Chuck then said, and this really started with me with UB when I went to the Hawks. He was, as Rick would tell you, when he was his assistant, UB was the most incredible coach, leader, alpha dog of all time. Even though he was my high school coach, I was scared shit of him. Okay. And I was so intimidated. I had no right being there. I didn't know anything about the NBA. It's only me and Mike Fratello. And the first day of summer league practice, UB's going to run the summer league practice. There's 2,500 people in the gym he allows in to watch us. It is a coaching clinic. And I am petrified at 1 minute of 10. And he walks over to me and he says, "Hey, just be yourself. It's good enough. Don't try to be me." And that was like a weight was taken off me. So, so Chuck said, you have to establish who you want to be as a coach, and why do you coach the way you coach. Don't try to be who you are. If you're not authentic, it's going to come through. So you worked with this amazing, one of the best I've ever seen in Rick. When you first started out, just like in parenting, you copy your own mom and dad. Was it a little of that with Rick?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Coach, that you say that, because I think what happens is, it's like if you talk about styles of play, let's just talk about college, right?
Sure.
Like Bobby Knight won with emotion kind of offense. Coach Pitino and Nolan Richardson won by pressing and running and creating turnovers. Dean Smith had that numbered fast break, the Carolina break, right? Like there's a lot of ways to go about winning. And I think that I'm happy I was able to learn this from Coach Pitino. One is, no one's going to be him, and I cannot be him.
Sure.
But there are certain things that you have to do as a coach to put your team in position to be successful. And how you go about doing that has to be predicated on the authenticity of who you are as a person. The minute you start to try to mirror somebody or be somebody you're not, that's when it becomes very difficult. So being with Coach Pitino, I'm a big, big believer stylistically of the way he coached the game and the way our teams played the game, and has had an incredible impact on me in college and in the NBA. Right? Like I was not around Dean Smith, but like if you probably talk to Dean Smith's assistants, they probably think the way the Carolina played is a great style of play, right? Same thing with, Bobby Knight. You get a belief in how you want to play the game, coach the game. But when I was, let's say, coaching in Coach Pitino's style of play, because obviously I took so much from him when I went to Marshall, leaving him at Kentucky, I have the same beliefs on the way the game should be played, but how do I get the team to do the things that we have to do inside of our style of play by being myself?
Mm.
Because if I take Coach Pitino the way he's playing stylistically and I try to go be him, it's probably not going to work. So I got to find a way to get our team to do the things that you need to get your teams to do through being authentic and real and true to myself and who I am as a coach.
Would you call yourself a demanding coach when you were in college?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
No, which I think is great. And so here's the next question from Chuck would be, and this one, I'd never heard this, and I asked you this years ago. Would Billy Donovan would he have wanted to play for you, Billy Donovan? And your answer was freaking awesome.
Yeah, I don't even remember what the answer was, Coach. But
I guarantee it'll be the same answer.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Because I think that when you're demanding on players, I think there is a responsibility to explain why. And I think in a culture and an environment now where a lot of times people maybe don't take what it would be considered criticism or constructive criticism or getting on somebody or being demanding, is it gets to a place where the player feels like, gosh, he's always on me. He's always on me. Nothing's ever good enough. It was really, really interesting. My first year at Florida, at the Hall of Fame, a group of guys showed up on my first team from Florida, and they were all walk-ons. And they were talking about how hard I was on them and practices and things like that. But the thing I tried to explain to them is they were all better than what they and how they viewed themselves. They viewed themselves as walk-ons. And I told them, you guys were good players. And I demanded more out of you because you weren't demanding out of yourself. And I saw more in you than maybe you saw in yourself at 18 or 19 years old. So I think that if that's explained, and I probably at that point, being 30 years old, didn't do a very good job explaining that to those guys at that point in time. They probably thought I was just mad all the time. But there was more I was trying to get out of them. And I think you have to explain what you're doing when you're doing that. Hey, do you know why I'm on you all the time? Do you understand why I'm on? This is what I'm trying to do. And I think if the player has a clearer cut understanding of what you're doing, maybe they take to the coaching and the demands a little bit better.
That is exactly what you said. And you would because you're demanding but not demeaning. It's a big difference.
Right.
I think, right? Yeah. You better be demanding just like as a parent, et cetera. And now when you go to Florida over all those years, you have to build up a program from the bottom up. But you were one of the first. Many guys in college back then were playing with two post players offensively. How did you come to a style that was so effective that it kept evolving? And then you did, everyone thinks Joe Kim and Horford and Udonis, they're really all Hall of Famers, but they were not Hall of Famers when you got them. No disrespect to them at all. And Udonis wasn't even drafted and turned into I'm not sure he might still be playing. He's the best and turned out to be this incredible. He's one of my favorite people on television because you talk about authenticity. That guy is the real deal. And then Al and Joe, those guys, they just were such beautiful chemistry. How did that all come together for you?
Well, I think the one thing that helped me when I first got to Florida, and especially coaching Udonis, was he was a relentless competitor. He was unbelievable. Just a great will, a great heart, a great teammate, and I'll never forget it. We're in the NCAA tournament. I think it was maybe his junior year in college, and we were playing against a really good front court player from Western Kentucky. I actually think the guy got drafted in the lottery. I don't think he played long, but he was a really, really, really good player. And he said to me before the game, like shoot around, he said to me, Coach, he said, listen, don't go to me early in the game. Let me run this guy up and down the court and just wear him out, and you come to me later, right? And it was so profound. But the one thing I learned from Udonis that I think is really, really critical in terms of going forward in recruiting is if you have front court players that have incredible physical stamina and endurance and a motor. And if you look at the front court guys that we had at Florida, Udonis, great motor, great competitor. David Lee, great motor, endurance, could play all day. Joe Kim, motor. Horford, motor. Matt Bonner, motor. Like when you get front court players that have an unbelievable ability and endurance to play and compete for long stretches, I think then, that's the stuff that ultimately I think really allows your team to flourish. And to your point, we did play a lot of times with two big guys. And we were fortunate. I was fortunate to coach some of, in my opinion, the greatest big guys. And certainly, with Joe Kim and Al playing together, both of those guys were one really smart, great IQ, toughness, competitiveness, and great teammates.
Yeah. And I remember when you played UCLA in the finals, and they were so good defensively, and Ben Howland was a great coach. And I remember us talking before the game, and they were not letting teams make a guard forward pass. They were denial. And I remember you said, we're not going to pass the ball. We're just going to play high pick and roll. And they blitzed every pick and roll. And you just turned it into a clinic of roll, replace, feed the post, back cut the guy. And you simplified the game so beautifully. How did the game come to you as far as to be the most profound and effective coach I think you can be nowadays is to take what really appears to be complex and make it simple for guys to understand?
Yeah, I think that as the game has evolved, Coach, you and I can talk about how we grew up, right? There was no AAU, there was nothing organized. You went to a schoolyard, you went to a park, you went to somebody's backyard, you played 2-on-2, you played 3-on-3. You were always kind of playing with your friends, and you kind of learned the game that way. And I think what's happened a lot of times now is everybody's got, individual workout guys, and there's nothing wrong with it. Guys are always working on their game, and they're trying to find ways to get better. But I don't necessarily see guys like I drive past schoolyards and playgrounds now and they're empty, right? Back in, 40 years ago, they would be packed in the summertime with people playing. And if you lost, you had to sit down for a while to wait to get back on the court. And I think with the way these guys have grown up right now, there's just a different way that they play the game. And they're athletic, they're talented, they're gifted, they shoot the ball with deeper range. But they didn't necessarily maybe grow up the game playing a lot of 5-on-5. A lot of it was structured. It was organized. And the game for these players, I think, how do you simplify things where they can play to their strengths, play to their skill set, and be effective with what they do well? And I think that requires, communication with players, talking to players. I think letting a player know how you see them, and then having the player tell you how they see themselves, because sometimes there's a disconnect there where you see a player in a specific role and a player doesn't see himself in that role, and that requires a discussion and a conversation. But I do think that with the way the game's being played now, can you get guys to play the game where they're not thinking too much? Because as a coach, you can put in a lot of plays, you can put in a lot of schemes, and now all of a sudden players can get paralyzed by trying to think too much. And how do you free them up where they understand the things they have to do to impact the teams, from a winning standpoint, but how do you do it in a way that it frees them up mentally?
When we started coaching, you and when we started coaching, when we would have, let's say, a shoot around or, we're teaching a play or defense, we would do that. We would put it in, we would go, and I can remember 10 years being with UB and Fratello, and every scouting report, they're telling you exactly what to do. And there were so many set plays back then. And I never forget that the first time I went and did a scouting report with Chuck, with the players, I can remember it. It's against the Knicks, and it's a side pick and roll. Patrick Ewing setting the pick, Gerald Wilkins coming off it. And I said, okay. And I'm telling Isaiah or Dumars and Lambier, here's how we're going to defend it. And just as I'm ready to tell them that we're going to hedge, Chuck says, that's enough. And I'm like, what do you mean with? This is no meetings about this. This is just like, and he says, how do you guys want to defend it? And I'm like in the league for 10 years and I'm going, no one asks a player how to defend it. And it was the most brilliant thing I ever heard in my life. And it changed from then on. I always asked how to do it. And it was the idea that, I said, why did you do that? Later on, he says, if that's not what they think works, wait till you see what they do to your defense. He says, and he said, and if it doesn't work, if they think they want to go under the pick and roll and the guy makes 3 threes, At the first timeout, we'll say, how's that working? And they'll say, not good. All right. And we'll switch it. Okay. And it taught me a lesson of involving them for ownership. Has that evolved? And I'm sure it was there in the pros when you got there, 10
Yeah, I
years
mean,
ago.
I think I learned a lot of that. It was interesting when I never forget this. So we win a national championship in 2006, and those guys all make a decision to come back.
Yeah.
And as they make the decision to come back, we have a overseas trip that we're taking. But we did it where we went to Canada over Labor Day weekend. So we had 10 days of practice in August. And then we took the long weekend and went to Canada and played 3 games from like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Labor Day, we came back home. But it was 10 days of practice. So we had 2 sessions of summer school, summer A, summer B. And summer A was, earlier in the summer. And I would give those guys after the season, they don't need to come back for summer A, but they need to be back for summer B. Well, at the end of summer B, that second summer session was when we were going to start practice. So before they leave to get ready to go home, they come back and they want me to cancel the trip. They don't want to go.
Whoa.
Now, the school's already put up the money. We've already committed to this, and they don't want to go. And I'm like, listen, I'm giving you guys 6 weeks off. You got to come back. We can't, not do the trip. We're committed to it. I don't understand. You guys want more time away? And they were like, no, you're going to kill us for 10 days in practice.
Whoa.
And then we got to come back and do preseason conditioning. And then we got a month of practice before our first game. It's too much. And I learned a valuable lesson then. And I said to them, okay, how about if we practice 1 hour a day? And they're like, that's never happening. You're never going to do that, right? I said, listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go 15 minutes of offense, 15 minutes of defense. We'll go 15 minutes of pressing because we pressed back then. And we'll do some kind of special situation end of game stuff, right? 4 15-minute segments. But here's going to be the caveat. I'm going to trust you guys. If that 15 minutes on offense is not up to the standard, we're starting over. The clock's going back. So you give me 1 hour of hard intensity, and they're like, will you do that? And I'm like, yes. And from that point forward, as we went through practice, I would bring those guys up during the season in practice and tell them, this is what we need to get done. This is how long it's going to be. But here's the expectation of what it needs to look like. And you guys are in control of it. And to be honest, we cut back a lot of practice that second year. Now, one of the most humbling experiences I ever had is my first shoot around in the NBA. We're playing San Antonio Spurs. They got Kawhi Leonard, Tim Duncan still playing, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, all those great San Antonio. They're still there.
And Popovich is the coach.
And Popovich is the coach. So I'm sitting there and shoot around, and I got Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Ibaka, Steven Adams, all these guys. And it hits me when we start going through the scouting report and how we're going to guard actions. I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm looking at Kevin Durant and I'm saying to myself, he knows way more about how to guard Kawhi Leonard than I ever know right now.
Sure.
And Russell Westbrook knows way more about how to guard Tony Parker than I do. And to your point, that's when it comes into, what do you think is best to do here? What do you feel comfortable? I'll never forget, we were playing against Sacramento, and Rajon Rondo was the point guard for Sacramento. And obviously I coached against Rajon when he was at Kentucky. Smart, IQ, really a great player. And I told Russell that I wanted him to back up the guard. And I could just tell by his body language, he was not wanting to do that. So I grabbed him and I said, Russ, what do you not, what's the problem? You don't like it? He says, Coach, if I back up and pick him up at the top of the key, below the top of the key, I'm just a sitting duck for every pick and roll, and I'm going to get cracked left and right. I said, okay, how do you want to guard it? And he goes, let me get up on him, and then at the point of the screen, make a decision to go over or under. But don't have me back, because I'm just going to be a sit. And you know what? He was 1,000% right.
How about that?
And I got incredible advice when I first went to Oklahoma City. Jim O'Brien called me to congratulate me, and he gave me, and I didn't understand it at the time, and I understood it at that first shoot around against San Antonio. He said to me, he said, Billy, do not underestimate how smart these guys are. And he said, you can gain a wealth of knowledge by picking their brain and asking them questions. And that was so right, is at the NBA level, these guys have experienced so much. There's got to be a partnership and there's got to be ownership by both parties, And listen, there's been times where we've had some tough conversations like any coach player where you say, like you said, no, listen, trust me, let's just do it this way. Put your best foot forward. If it's not working, I'll change. Or they'll come to me and say, listen, I don't like this. Can we do it this way? Okay, let's do it that way. There's got to be that because they're the ones that are out there playing. There's things that they see and feel in between the lines that I could never see and feel from the sideline.
If you were coaching in college now, with what you know after all these years in the NBA, all these college players are now professional players. Big difference how you coach them as pros now that they're college. And the college guys I get a kick out of because they're scared to death. They're coaching them afraid. They might leave. They might transfer. And that's the opposite. That's totally the opposite way. And they have to first understand that they're professional coaches themselves. They've been getting paid, but now they're coaching and pro players. What do you think they evaluate you on? Not you now, but when you're a coach, knowing what you know, what do you think a player evaluates you on the most? Is how competent you are, the way you can connect with him, although your work ethic, the way you deal with them. How do you think that the pro players, how do they evaluate a pro coach? And then what do you think about the college player?
Yeah, I think I've used this, analogy a little bit. Like, I think it would be like this. When you're a parent and you've got a child that's 15 or 16 years old, the conversations with them at 15 or 16 years old are a lot different when they're 28 and 29 years old, mm-hmm. Right? So they're more worldly. I think from an NBA standpoint, forget about the money piece of it.
Yeah.
I find they're all really driven and motivated and competitive. And Coach, you've been in the league longer than I've ever been in the league. When you're dealing with the best in the world, these guys get to this level because they're very driven, they're very motivated, and they're very competitive. And I think that the expectation, as a coach is, one, can you be consistent each and every day of who you are as a person? Where it's not like you're coming in one day and you're one way, another day. You've got to be consistent. And it doesn't mean you can't be upset after losses or performances or things like that. And then I think the other part of it too is there's got to be this open communication where you're partnering with them to help them be successful. And then the next part is, can you put them in positions where they can play their strengths and their skill set? I think what happens with the high school player coming into college, it's the first time they're away from home. It's the first time they're on their own. It's a totally different game than high school, just as college is a totally different game than the NBA. You've got to, I think, there can be a little bit of high school to college, a little bit delusional of how it's going to be or how it's going to go and the way it's going to be. And it takes those experiences for players to kind of grow. But I also feel like in college, they need you to help with the transition process from high school to college and being away from home. They need somebody that can help them there and that. Whereas I think the NBA player is been on their own. They're mature. They're older. They're more worldly. They're more experienced. You're not helping them with the transition. You're helping them with the next game or the next practice in terms of what they need or what they're looking for to go out on the court and be successful.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And the high school to college transition, so overlooked, I think. I want you to talk about when you were coaching in college. I thought you were the best pressing team in the country. I watched the Olympics, and I watch all this international teams. Whether uh, you know whether it be Serbia, Spain, they're all picking up full court, and they're all picking up the U.S. guards at full court, which I find fascinating. Uh, it's a 40-minute game. I get that, only 8 minutes less, but in pressing in college, I think there should be more of it because I don't think anyone wants to bring the ball up the court with pressure. I know Rick did it also. And then I saw in the NCAA tournament, teams couldn't even get the ball in bounds at the end of games, But what's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think being around Coach Pitino for as long as I was a player and a coach, it's had a big impact on me. We always pressed at Florida. Now, there were times with Joe Kim Noah and Al Horford, we had so much size and rim protection that there were times we didn't press in different parts of the game. But I've always, tried to press, and, sometimes it's trapping, sometimes it's not. But I think you're starting to see it. Like, I thought one of the best teams in the league this year, and you saw it in the playoffs, is I thought, Rick Carlisle, the Indiana team,
sure,
they were up, picking up, and those guys, made it difficult on you physically. I think what's happened in the NBA is the idea of having these three stars, and certainly you need elite high-level players to get to those levels of the playoffs. There's no question about that. But what's happening right now is they're making fatigue, physicality, that a big part of the game to maybe offset maybe not being as talented in certain positions. And this, Coach, better than anybody. It's like you're in the playoffs against the Celtics and you're dealing with Larry Bird. And you're sitting there saying, okay, like, how are we going to guard this guy? And, we get down into the half court. I think the game has become so much faster in the NBA.
Yeah.
Because it's really, really, really hard on the star players. And what I mean by that is there's so much productivity those guys put out offensively and so much they exert offensively, and the ability and the skill set that they have, and to do it night in and night out and night in and night out. I mean, it is a draining, and being up close to it to see what they go through and how they can keep performing is amazing. But I think for a lot of teams, like, listen, if we can play fast and run up and down the floor and maybe take some teams and players' legs away from them, maybe it balances out the talent level, so to speak. And I think you're starting to see, at least in the NBA, a lot more teams picking up full court.
When I was with UB, again, didn't have a clue. I didn't even know the game was 48 minutes. I had no idea. He's playing his starters 32 minutes a game and the subs 16 every game. 10 players a quarter are getting in the game. And I don't know what the hell's going on, but I noticed, though, our second string every time, and our second string, our first string was very good, but our second string, not really that good. They're pressing 2-2-1 all the time, the second unit. And then when I go with Chuck, we're doing the same thing, free throws and 2-2-1. And I was happy that he liked that because I knew it. But what we added was, like you said, 2-2-1, but no traps, just to delay you. And they thought there were traps. And then every now and then we would have, what we called black, we'd go 2-2-1 and trap at half court. And I'll tell you what, it was amazing because I had Joe Dumars, who was the most fundamental player of all time. But when Rick Pitino pressed Joe Dumars, the most fundamental player in the NBA, Joe jumped up in the air and threw the ball out of bounds every game. And Isaiah, no problem. He knew how to handle it, give it up, and a whole. Joe couldn't do it. And that's when I said, when a press brother is the most fundamental player in the game, I said, that's intriguing to me. And I just thought and I was glad to see some of what Rick did, and I thought that was interesting. And I think we're going to see more of that. I thought that was a great point on your part.
Yeah, I just think that's the way the game is going a little bit because you know what? Like if you have a star player in the backcourt, let's say it's a primary ball handler, and just to have to make him work to bring the ball up the court, you just can't get to spots on the floor so simply. It's just you hope it takes a toll on a player. Because listen, there are just some nights when you're playing against and coaching against some of these guys where you're left at the mercy of whether or not they miss or make shots. You know what I mean? You can do all you want, unless you can somehow get the ball out of their hands. But if they get it in areas of the floor where you can't get to them, I mean, it's really whether or not they miss or make the shot. And, you try to find ways to say, listen, we'll have somebody else beat us on a given night rather than them. But there's just certain guys in the league that, if you play them one-on-one, you're just going to be left to the mercy of whatever they have. If they're hot, you're not turning it off. And if they are not, you're very lucky.
Yeah. When you're at Florida, your full court pressure, I'm almost going to take a risk on this one. Was it white, your full court defense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
That's good.
Yes. Very good, Coach. Very good.
That's good. I'm retiring now, Zach.
Yes.
But anyway, when you would do that, tell us, I know sometimes, and Rick would do the same thing. And when Rick was coaching the Knicks in the NBA, Chuck was so frightened. It was hysterical. Here's one of the best coaches in the world. And if we didn't have a day of practice, Chuck was he was done. And if we had a day of practice, he might put in 3 press offenses, and then Rick would come out, and he knew Chuck so well, and he loved Chuck, and he would come out. We had all of our press offenses, and Rick would not even press. He'd pick up man to man, or he wouldn't even press. And Chuck would exhale, and then all of a sudden, the second half, Rick would press our ass off, and we had forgotten to talk to the guys at halftime about it, and so there's all different kinds of ways of doing that. And sometimes would you start the game just picking up full court? Sometimes what would you?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Coach, and you're exactly right. Listen, this all probably comes from UB Brown to Coach Pitino, all the way through. So, what we did, at least when I played for Coach Pitino, and some of this evolved, was if it was a made basket on like a jump shot or a layup or whatever, it was a made basket, we would end up being in what we would call our white press, which was 1-2-2, right? And then, if it was a free throw situation or a dead ball situation, we may go black, which was 2-2-1. Coach Pitino started to evolve it when the 3-point line came in, was this: if we make a 2-point shot, it's white press 1-2-2. If it's a 3-point shot, it's 2-2-1. So I think the genius in what he was doing was he was giving different press looks based on where the ball was scored from.
Wow.
And I thought that at times confused people, and certainly I took that with me to Marshall and to Florida. And then you evolve as players and the game evolves as well. I do agree with you 1,000%. I think you're going to see more teams picking up, because here's the most interesting thing I thought about the playoffs. If you watch the playoffs during, this year, and you know this better than anybody, what generally happens? The rotation gets shrunk down to 8 guys.
Yep.
You're going to play 8 guys, right? This was probably the first time, and I think it's going this way to playoffs, where teams extended.
Yes.
You look at the amount of teams that amount of guys Mark Daigneault played. Look at the amount of people that Rick Carlisle played.
They're playing 11 guys a game.
Yes. So it got expanded because of the pace and the pressure and picking up. And listen, people don't realize this, Coach. Because of the pace and the speed of the game, you're dealing with 100 possessions on offense and 100 possessions on defense. I mean, it's, some teams are getting up 106 or 105 shots per game, or having 105 possessions because of the pace of the game. Players can't play the normal, NBA playoff, let's play them 42, 44 minutes. They could probably do it, but they may not be as effective or as efficient with those number of minutes. So I think you're starting to see a trend of more players playing in those moments.
Now, with the 100 possessions, that's a hell of a thing. With 100 possessions defensively, and there used to be a ton of pick and rolls. I'm not sure where the pick and rolls are now. I think maybe there's less. I might be wrong, but there's more ghost screens sometimes in pick and rolls, right?
That's right. That's right.
How did you evolve? And I know over 10 years you have evolved your pick and roll coverage Because I know it's had to go through, the whole league has had to go through different ideations of it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, from the standpoint that these guys are so good. So if you're giving a guy the same look, for Doncic, let's say, or LeBron James, these guys are just on a different level IQ wise, and they've seen every possible coverage and scheme that you can imagine. And if you keep throwing it out at them over a period of time, they're just going to eventually just pick you apart, whether it's with their own talent or ability. And a lot of times those guys are so unselfish and smart, they do it with the pass. So there's times you got to be back in drop coverage. There's times you got to be up to the level of the screen. There's times where maybe you have to blitz. There's times you have to keep it on the side. So in a lot of ways, coming in and out of timeouts, you're trying to switch up coverages, or even after free throws. What we try to do, Coach, sometimes is like, for example, like we would call volumes, right? Like a volume 1 is all the way up to the level of the screen. Volume 2, was back more in a drop. And volume 3 was, let's say, an all-out blitz, where you could sit there and say, coming out of a free throw, hey, we're volume 3 right now, where we're blitzing it. Or it's a dead ball, hey, we're going back, we're volume 2, we're back in a drop. You know what I mean? Where you're able to, in the course of the game, without having a timeout, be able to change, some of that stuff. And this was my point a little bit earlier from, I don't think a high school basketball player could go into an NBA game and absorb that stuff that quick. Whereas you think about these guys that have been in the league for a long period of time, there's so much these guys can absorb mentally and what they can do. And a lot of times it's not about the repetition of practice as much as it's about walking through film sessions, those kind of things to help them. But you have to have a variety of pick and roll coverages, and I think, I watch college games, Coach, and I see teams, and it's great. Like they stay in the same pick and roll coverage for 40 minutes. And they're really good at it. Like, you know what I mean? Because a lot of these players, that's just kind of what they do. And, whereas like, I think in the NBA, there's a lot more, where it will go from coverage to switching to, there's a lot to deal with.
Why do you think pro coaches, or maybe even more college coaches, now I see it all the time, college players can't guard post people, because they let the college postman back you in, bang you, etc. And then you only have 5 fouls, where I believe it's very disruptive to go and trap a guy, because they're usually not good passers. And then secondly, college coaches don't have good schemes if you're trapped. I hate to say it. Right. They just think you throw the ball out and you're going to make a 3. The schemes that guys in the NBA run to get single coverage in the post is phenomenal, I think. It's very advanced stuff. Why don't we see more trap posting? Now the league's getting bigger, and our pros too now.
I think you're getting it some, Coach, like on some players, like for example, like a guy like Kevin Durant, if they're running any kind of cross screen action or they're getting him down into the low post area, generally he's going to have a size differential, and he's impossible down there when he's got his back to the basket. It's impossible. So like that may be a guy you're running and trapping on. But here's the most interesting thing, Coach, is that, and I really wish they would do this in college. If they ever could take the floor dimensions of an NBA court and put it in college, it would help these guys transition from college to the NBA. Because here's what happens is
lane lines, you mean,
it's
right?
It's so wide that, sometimes those now analytically become bad shots from there. Now, you get 2 feet in the restricted area, 2 feet in the paint, and you're a front court guy, it's probably a great look. But if you've got guys taking jump hooks on that lane line, there are certain guys, I'm not going to say like Jokic is probably one of those guys. It doesn't make a difference where he is on the floor. But
right.
A lot of these guys, it's hard to shoot a really, really good percentage. So as you start to break down, I think this is where some of the analytics have come in, and some of it's based on personnel. You're starting to see less and less mid-range jump shots. But there are certain guys, like DeMar DeRozan, having him for 3 years was unbelievable in the mid-post area because he got fouled a lot. Kevin Durant's amazing in those areas because they get fouled a lot. But for a lot of players, those are tough shots to make. So you start to see corner threes, teams trying to get to the rim, teams trying to get to the free throw line above the break threes. But a lot of that post-up stuff is guys are going to live with certain guys down there shooting those shots. And they're going to say, listen, you can't make enough of them. Whereas to your point, in college, because the lane line is so tighter, those shots are a lot different than the shots the guys are taking in the NBA.
Yeah. When you you've evolved every year. I think you've been in the NBA. Your teams now are among the 3 or 4 best offensively in the league as far as productivity and all the analytics. Um, how did you evolve your style of play as a coach in the NBA?
Yeah, it's like kind of like what we said earlier, Coach. There are certain things that I just believe in as a coach. I just flat out believe in. Like I believe in ball movement. I believe in making the extra pass. I believe in obviously spacing. I believe in if someone's got a good one and you got a good one and someone's got a better one, move the ball. Like there's certain things fundamentally I think as coaches we all believe in, but I think in the NBA you have a responsibility to your players to play to their strengths. So, for example, when we had 2 years ago, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, we were one of the league leaders in a lot of like non-paint two shots. And, Nikola Vucevic was a 2-time All-Star playing that way. He's like a really, really good player. Zach LaVine is like an explosive offensive scorer.
Right.
And DeMar DeRozan, people, he's just like the master in the mid-range area. Now, from an analytical standpoint, that may not be the trend of the NBA, but that's what those guys are elite at. So I felt as a coach, we needed to play to their strengths. Since we've made some trades, and Zach and DeMar are now in Sacramento, Vooch is still here, Alex Caruso's in Oklahoma City, Lonzo Ball just ended up going to, Cleveland. Last year, we tried to play 100 miles an hour with a lot of young guys and open the floor up and play really, really fast. Whereas when I had those veteran guys earlier on, they're so good at manipulating the game inside the half court. Can you get them the ball in areas of the floor that they have space to play? But if they do get trapped, do they have the reads that they can make for their outlets?
That's good.
And those guys were great to work with. But I do think stylistically, at least in the NBA, you have to look at your personnel. You could sit there and be incredibly stubborn and saying, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And it's just not good for your personnel. And you've got to coach to your personnel as best you can.
Therefore, if you were make believe, no rumors here, that if you were coaching in college now, just to flip it there, would you go out and recruit the players to fit your style of play, or would you see who you recruit and then build your style of play?
I would probably there in college do it more from, how you want to play. I'll give you a great example. And listen, the one thing that's been great in Chicago, the working relationship to talk about some of that stuff's been great, And again, when we had Lonzo Ball and Caruso and Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan and Vooch healthy, we were a really good team. Once we got riddled with injuries, it kind of changed quite a bit. But I'll give you a great story. I was coaching the USA team, 19 and under team. And the youngest player on the team was Jahlil Okafor. And I thought Jahlil Okafor was the best low post player I had ever seen at that age. I couldn't believe it. Now, I'm not comparing him to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Moses Malone, but like during that time, over a 20-year period, he was incredible. Jokic from the Denver Nuggets was on the Serbian national team, and the Serbian national team could not guard Okafor. All these guys on the team were going into their freshman year of college. Okafor was going into a senior year of high school.
Oh, my
I could not believe this guy offensively. He was incredible. But while I was coaching him, I had a great conversation with his father because he was over there. We're in the Czech Republic. And, he was really gracious and nice about recruiting Jahlil. And summer ends, and I watch Jahlil play in AAU. And I'm like, man, like he's so good, so good. But I have to totally change our style of play for a guy that's only going to be there for about 9 months.
Good call.
Because, you got guys back in the day in the 80s like Patrick Ewing that are there for 4 years. Well, you get him for 4 years and you want to change your style of play. Great. And I basically told them, like, I love him as a player and love him as a guy and love his ability, but we would have to change the way we play. So I've always I've always felt this way, Coach. I've tried to, when I was in recruiting in college, as I evolved and got along, to me, I got less consumed with the talent and more consumed with the competitive makeup of the guys we were bringing in. That was more important to me, because if you've got a guy that, again, most of these guys can play in all sorts of different styles of play. But if to me, really what it comes down to is who and what do you want your team to look like? Because I think a lot of times we talk about winning, winning, winning. A lot of times as a coach, I think you need to think about, how do you actually want to lose a game? What do you want losing to look like? Do you want it to be like, hey, we don't compete, we're not physical, we're not tough, we don't play together, we're selfish, we're like, those are things where you sit there and say, or do you want to lose like these guys, every second they're out there, they're competing, they're playing together, they're putting their bodies in play, they're physical, they're trying to lift each other up, they're leaning into the moment, and you lose. Not that you're going to be happy losing, but you feel differently when you walk off the court losing. So I've tried to always identify, and I've always been fascinated by, like, just using it as an example, like Tom Brady, for example. You look at him at the draft combine coming out of Michigan. You may say, how does this guy even get drafted in the NFL? Never mind, has this guy become the greatest quarterback of all time? Is it his body? Is it his talent? Or is it mentally his drive and competitiveness and understanding what it is to be a teammate and lift people up around you? And I think as I was recruiting, a lot of times I used to remember this. I would try to go to watch guys play AAU games at 8:00 in the morning. I wanted to see, like, is this guy up and ready to play, or is he tired? Like, I never forget, I was recruiting Brett Nelson one time, and I was coming out of the hotel, and their team was in the same hotel, and I was walking out. They had an 8:00 game. He's like sitting on the bench, down at in the hotel lobby at like 7:00 in the morning, like with his bag, like just ready to play. I remember seeing Al Horford after losing in the semifinals of the AAU national tournament in Las Vegas, and on the bench crying that he lost. Like, there's certain things that I think players give you clues of how important the game is to them. And I've always tried to identify guys that have a great passion and desire and a drive to individually want to be good, but also want to compete and want to win.
I remember, I think it was a year or two ago at Shai's clinic, and you went and talked to Todd Golden's team. And I remember you said something to the effect of, I've been in the draft room for a decade. We've never, ever talked about how many points you score, how many points you average. All we talk about, can you help us win?
Yeah, right? Coach, is exactly right. I've never had, and here's the other thing too: when you're in some of these draft meetings, and you just sit there and like, listen, I'm not as astute or knowledgeable as our scouts, because I just don't see enough college basketball to comment on players. But when I am getting updates, or we sit down and I get refreshed of who this player is and this player, and I watch film and do some of that stuff, they never talk about that stuff. They never talk. And the thing that's amazing, coaches, think about this, and I wish players would understand this. And I did this at Florida years ago. I had one of our managers take a stopwatch, and I said, I want you guys to track how long the ball is in each one of our guys' hands for the length of the time that they're on the court. And as you can imagine, the point guard's going to have the ball in his hands more than anybody. So I said to one of our players who was a starter at Florida, I don't say it was, I said, how many minutes do you think you had the ball in your hands for the game? And the guy says to me, 15 minutes. I said, 15 minutes? I said, you played 30. That's like half your minutes. What the numbers came out to be, Coach, was this. A backcourt player, for the most part, is probably 92% of the game is going to be played without the ball in their hands. A front court player, 95% of their minutes is going to be played without the ball in their hands. And it's amazing to me how many players focus on what you just said. Points, points, points.
Yeah.
And I get that's what goes on ESPN.
Sure.
That's what gets the highlights. That's what people want to talk. I get all that. But if you're going to strictly talk about winning and you're really driven and motivated by winning and competing and being a good teammate, you have to look at the fact is, what am I doing with my 92, 93, 94, 95%? Am I screening? Am I running the floor? Am I on the floor for loose basketballs? Am I rebounding? Am I taking a charge? Like, there's so many ways to impact the game with the amount of time you're on the floor when the ball's not in your hands.
That's awesome. I love that. Rick Pitino, you mentioned at the Hall of Fame ceremony, you said it might have done the best job of anyone in developing coaching tree, the terminology of people that have worked for him as an assistant going on to become head coaches, and how he felt that was a responsibility. You, my friend, as your tree, its branches are really getting out there. So many people that have worked for you, first of all, have gotten head coach jobs. And if not, they have better jobs than when they were with you as an assistant, which is awesome. What do you feel about that responsibility? And it's very intentional what you're doing and what Rick did. Your thoughts on coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I learned so much from Coach Pitino, even though at the time you don't know, right? Like, you're 24, 25 years old. I never forget this. So I'm like 24, 25 years old. I've got my first position with Coach Pitino at Kentucky. It's a graduate assistant position. He tells me, listen, I can't hire as an assistant coach. You have no experience, but you know what? You can learn, you can grow, and you can move your way up. I'm like, and I go ahead and do it. So after my first year as a graduate assistant, he tells me that Brown University wants to interview me for the head coaching job in Providence. So I said to him, I said, Coach, I don't want to go to Brown. And he gets all over me. You're entitled. You know how hard it is to be a Division I head coach, and he's all over me about this. And I'm like, okay, I never really looked at it, but I'm thinking, I'm with Coach Pitino. I'm at Kentucky. I want to stay with him and learn. And he's like, no, you're going to. So I take the interview, and I'm now trying to wrap my head around the fact that I may be leaving after a year of being the head coach at Brown, right? And I'm sitting here saying, like, do I really want to do this? So I go through the interviewing process, and at the end of the process, they offer me the job.
Oh my God. I never knew this story. That's great.
And he tells me, just call me and let me know how it goes. So I pick up the phone and I call him. He's like, how's it going? I say, Coach, it went good. I'm kind of like trying to act excited, but like I'm not, because I think now I'm leaving to go to Brown, right? So I said, Coach, I said, they offered me the job. You wanted me to call you. I'm obviously, tell them we're going to accept it. He says, no, tell them you turned it down. Tell them thanks for everything. You turned it down. So I turn it down and I go back, and he sits me down and explains the whole thing to me about, you need to go through an interviewing process. You need to understand what this is all about. And then it made sense to me, but at the time it didn't, right?
Right.
And I'll never forget this. Like, there was just things he did to me, Coach, that at the time you don't understand, but then later you understand. And I always felt this had such an impact on me because I felt such a responsibility to my assistants. So one time, I'm another time, graduate assistant, like first or second year at Kentucky. And everybody knows Kentucky basketball. I mean, it is, obviously huge, big people, great fan following, unbelievable support. People are totally passionate. And practice ends, and he says, listen, I got to do my radio show tonight, but I got to leave to go recruiting. You're going to handle the last half hour of my radio show. And I'm like, okay. So like I go down, he leaves, and I handle the last half hour of his radio show for him, call in the whole bit. And he then explains to me, he's like, Billy, like, listen, you become a head coach, you're going to have to do a weekly radio show. This is part of it. So I got one situation, he's teaching me how to go through an interview and talk to people. Now I've got another situation where he's telling me I've got to do radio shows, and he's giving me the experience to do that. And then I'll never forget this. Like, I talked to a lot of coaches, in college, and we would always talk about like responsibility during practice. And I cannot tell you, Coach, how many college assistants told me all they do is stand on the sidelines and just clap, and their primary responsibility is just to recruit, and they
Yeah.
never coach. That was never that with Coach Pitino.
Yeah.
I mean, you go into a staff meeting, Billy, you're taking this drill, you got this drill, and he would make you coach, and he would put you on the court and put you in those situations. And there was times where we would be in timeouts in crucial situations in games, and you probably remember this, Coach. Like, he'd have chalk in his pocket, and he would write diagrams on the court, with chalk.
Yeah.
Because there was no like dry erase boards. So
You're right.
you would draw on the court with chalk. And I'll never forget it. Like, in front of the team, he says to me, "What do you want to do defensively here?" Like, right in front of the team.
Holy shit.
But like, I'm thinking he's going to do it, but also made me realize, like, you got to be ready for these moments. And I had to give an answer to the team.
Wow.
So I just am and that's why at the Hall of Fame, when I spoke about being indebted, it wasn't so much being indebted in terms of playing for him, or it was what he invested in me. It's how he invested in me and what he did for me all the way around. And when I got hired at Marshall at 28, he told me, "You have a responsibility to your assistant coaches. Your job and responsibility, to the best of your ability, is to prepare them to be head coaches." And, and that's what I tried to do for you. And I always remembered that. So when I've seen, it was interesting, you talk to different people, and people have said to me, "How do you just let people walk out the door for other opportunities? Why don't you keep?" And I've said, "Listen, if I can help somebody get to a place they want to get to, I feel like I got a responsibility to do that, not try to keep them here to benefit me. If someone wants to see something or do something that maybe they want to do." And listen, I've had coaches that have wanted to get out of it and go do something else. Like, great, that's totally fine too. But I always felt like, am I doing a good job putting guys in situations where they're getting a chance to coach and be a part of it and see all aspects of a program or a job? And I've just always tried to do that. And the reason I've tried to do that is because of him and what he did for me.
That is so good. I mean, that's the essence of coaching right there, and what he did. No, that's the complete package, and that's what's so good. But we could do 2 more hours, buddy, but I know the Bulls are waiting for you to get over there to work. But yeah. Bill, congrats on a great honor. It's so deserving. And it was amazing to watch all the guys that played for you, worked for you and stuff to be there. It's special and an honor that they were honored to be there. And so that is so cool and stuff. But,
I just want to say one thing, Coach, if you don't mind.
Oh,
so a lot of people don't know this. So what ended up happening was, and you know this, Coach.
Yeah.
You're in with the Orlando Magic with Chuck Daly.
Yep.
You guys are going through lockouts, and you would drive to Gainesville, Florida.
Yep.
We kind of knew each other from afar a little bit, but it wasn't a relationship, right? And the investment you personally made into me and my time and our staff at Florida, I can't thank you enough. And I really meant when I was up there at the podium at the Hall of Fame, I didn't score any points. I didn't grab any rebounds or get any assists. I'm just a reflection of a lot of people around me. And you were one of those people, Coach. For 25 years, we talked basketball. You invested in me. We talked about our teams. I can remember even the years when we were struggling. We talk on the phone when I was driving home all the time. And you would give me crunch time plays from what you guys ran with the Detroit Pistons. And you'd look at our team at the end of the game and give me different actions. And although there's people that I worked with, and certainly Coach Pitino and Mo Cheeks and Anthony Grant, Donnie Jones, Larry Shyatt, all these coaches you're talking about, there was also people like you that maybe we didn't work together, but in reality, we did work together, friendship. And I can't thank you enough for the investment you put into me personally and our staff and our players in trying to help us. So thank you.
Well, no, it's an honor to be involved with you and your incredible family. My God, I can remember when there were so little. And then we had Billy the Third out speaking of coaching you this year, and to have him at Shy's deal last year, to watch him just develop into an incredible coach and stuff. To me, that's full circle stuff, man. That's what this incredible. I never dreamt of being anything. I wanted to be a high school coach. I never became one. I never wanted to be a college coach. Never wanted to be in the NBA. Didn't know anything about it. Never thought I'd ever do a clinic. You know, you and Rick Pitino are the best clinicians I've ever seen in my life. I never thought I'd ever speak at a clinic, let alone own one. And now it's just about what can we do to help coaches around the world get better. And our whole thing with Zach and I are coaching you. What we're trying to do is help coaches around the world get better. And you are a major contributor. You've always been there for us, and we love you to death for that. And I appreciate it so much.
Feelings mutual, Coach. I appreciate you.
Get your ass to work, all right?
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.